Okay, Gabby. This is week 5 of the Max Lucado book, uh, Experiencing the Heart of Jesus. And this section starts on page, where is it? 19, When God Whispers Your Name. I'm going to give you a background story. And again, if I'm giving you too much information, let me know. But the background story, if you want to read it yourself, it's from Genesis chapter 37 through Genesis chapter 50. It is the story of Joseph, and I'm condensing it. So I'm not giving you all the details of the story. And I don't know, you may even have a VeggieTales video that tells you about it. But the story of Joseph, when we think of Joseph, we think the guy, hey, that's the guy with the coat of many colors. And Joseph had many brothers. And Joseph was favored by his father. And so Joseph had a coat of many colors. He went out to check on his brothers by his father's request. The brothers were very jealous of Joseph because Joseph had flaunted just a bit and told his brothers, hey, I had a dream. And God did give people dreams back then. He also gave them ways to interpret the dreams. But Joseph said, in my dream, you bow down to me. And that did not make the brothers happy and sit very well. So when Joseph came out to camp to see how the brothers were doing with the flocks and bring them food, they plotted to kill him. But one of the brothers, Reuben, said, they took Joseph's coat, they put him in a well, and they says, instead of killing him, maybe we should just sell him as a slave. We get money, we get rid of Joseph, and we'll just cut up his coat, put blood on it from a goat, and tell Dad that's what happened. And that's exactly what they did. And so, but God was with Joseph, and Joseph ended up in the hands of a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar was a very wealthy man, lots of money, lots of influence in society. And he thought Joseph was tremendous. And Joseph ended up running Potiphar's household and in charge of everything. So one day Joseph was in Potiphar's house, and his wife wanted Joseph to come lay with her. And Joseph was a very handsome man, but he was not interested in going to bed with his boss's wife. And so he did the best thing he could do, and he fled the scene. But when he did, she tore part of his clothing. And so then she called and insisted that that had happened. Now, I kind of think that maybe Potiphar knew his wife was that way, but yet he felt like he had to do something to Joseph, so he threw Joseph in jail. Well, while he was incarcerated, he found favor with the jailer, and the jailer continued to give him responsibilities. And there was a baker that worked for Pharaoh and a butler that worked for Pharaoh that had been thrown into jail, and they had dreams. And Joseph interpreted those dreams, and he was in charge of checking on the baker and the butler. And he interpreted the butler's dream, and Joseph says, hey, in 3 days you're going to be out of here. You're going to be restored to your service as a butler, and you can your job is secure. So then the baker's got, well, what happens to me? What about my dream? And Joseph says, well, in 3 days you're dead. And that's exactly what happened. And Joseph asked the butler, please tell Pharaoh about me because I've committed no crime. And the butler conveniently forgot. But then Pharaoh had a dream and no one could interpret it. And then the butler's like, oh yeah, there's this guy named Joseph and he's in prison and he interpreted my dream and the baker's dream. And so Pharaoh had Joseph come. Tell him, here's my dream. Tell me what it means. And Joseph said, it means 7 days of plenty are coming. 7 years, 7 years of plenty. And then there will be 7 years of famine coming. And we've got to prepare for it. So Pharaoh says, well, okay, you're in charge. You do it. So Joseph did exactly that. 7 years passed. Now he's been away from his family for about 15 years. 15 to 18. I haven't looked that up lately, so don't quote me on that. But anyway, it'd been a long time, and his brothers hadn't seen him. There was famine where they were, and so they decided, well, we need to go to Egypt because there's food there, and we can get food and bring it back to Dad. and our whole family, and we can feed everybody. So they came, long story short, leaving out details now, but they came and they said, you know what? We need food. And Joseph says, well, I'll get you food. But he recognized them. They did not recognize him. They thought he was, they had no idea where he was. They thought he might be dead. They weren't expecting him to be in charge of the land, unless he was second in command to Pharaoh. And of course, they didn't know that he understood Hebrew, because he's been in Egypt, so he's speaking Egyptian. But Joseph tested them because he wanted to see if his brothers, how their heart was. Were they still jealous? Would they be jealous of others? And he began to question them and found out he had a younger brother named Benjamin, and that Dad loved Benjamin so much. And so Joseph's like, well, bring Benjamin to me. And they're like, Dad'll die if anything happens to Benjamin. Well, they went and they got Benjamin. They brought Benjamin back. Then Joseph sent them on with all their grain and all the things they needed, but he hid his cup in Benjamin's sack. And then he sent his people out to accuse Benjamin of stealing the cup. And now they're very worried. Eventually, they come back to the palace. Joseph feeds them a nice meal. He sets them in their birth order. They're wondering how he knew what that was. And he revealed himself to his brothers. Now they're scared, but he said, no, I have forgiven you. And so Joseph forgave them. He told Pharaoh about his family and what all had happened. Pharaoh says, bring the whole family down. Bring the whole family. And we're talking about a huge amount of people and all their livestock. And Pharaoh gave them land, and Joseph continued to rule and work with Pharaoh until his death. Now, that's the end of Joseph's story. That's the end of Genesis. And then we pick up with Exodus. So I'm going to stop the video here, and then I'll do part 2, and we'll talk about Moses.